Good evening and welcome to this special behind the scenes look at Carlos Villa, Worlds in Collision, brilliantly curated by my colleagues Trisha Lagaso, Goldberg, and Mark Dean Johnson, who you'll see in just a moment. The Newark Museum of Art is particularly proud and excited to be premiering this landmark exhibition organized by the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco and the San Francisco Art Institute. As has been mentioned, this is the first retrospective that the museum has done on the work of a Filipino-American artist, and certainly the first museum show of the scale of Carlos Villa's work. So the show consists of some 36 really stunning works in a range of media, and you can have a little glimpse here. We're standing inside the exhibition looking out at the entrance. And in a second here, I'm going to turn it over to Mark and Trisha to bring their expertise to this wonderful show. So just by a little way of introduction, Trisha and Mark are both San Francisco-based independent curators, artists, and scholars, and both worked closely with Carlos Villa through their connections at the San Francisco Art Institute, which naturally gave rise to this project, which I believe they've been spending the past 5 years working on, and the love really comes through. So both Mark and Trisha have wonderful reputations for curating smart, innovative, and groundbreaking exhibitions of contemporary art, in this show, I really think you must come see it, or whenever you come. When you enter the main exhibition space, this is how you'll be greeted. And then what we're going to do now with the time that we have together is Mark will guide us through the main exhibition, and then Trisha Lagaso Goldberg. It's very unusual. We have 2 Trishas on this project, but it's been fun. So Trisha will take us through some of the collection works from the Newark Museum collection that really inspired a whole separate installation that you'll also see in our Asian gallery. And it's been a wonderful collaboration, wonderful experience to learn and work with both of you. So passing the microphone to you, Mark.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Johnson from San Francisco State University, and Trisha and I are thrilled to be here in Newark to premiere the first ever museum retrospective of a Filipino-American artist. There are all kinds of people that have supported this project. I want to mention the funders. This project has received support from the Luce Foundation, the Andy Warhol Foundation, the Carpenter Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Terra Foundation, and private individuals. So you can see there's a lot of people that care about it. And again, we are so thrilled to premiere it at the Newark Museum before it goes to San Francisco, and have this great opportunity to work with Linda, an old friend, and Trisha Bloom, a highly recognized curator of American art. Also, I want to point out that the exhibition is accompanied by a beautiful catalog produced by the University of California Press that I hope some of you will have an opportunity to look at. This is the cover of the catalog. One of the pages in the catalog reproduces a peculiar artwork because late in his career, Carlos Villa started to work with both image and text, and make teach is kind of a peculiar juxtaposition, but what it does is it points to these 2 facets of his career. Number 1, he was a maker, but number 2, he was a teacher, but a teacher in a very profound and deep way, a teacher of himself to relearn the art history of the world. Today, we're very involved with issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Carlos Villa is kind of this bridge between civil rights, multiculturalism, and today's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that's an important reason that we're so excited to have this show be at Newark. Carlos Villa was born in San Francisco in 1936. After high school, went to serve in the Korean War, and then came back at the age of 22 and started studying at the San Francisco Art Institute at the height of the beatnik era. And he was embraced as a beatnik, called an important member of the Rat Bastard Society by Bruce Conner. He was making paintings like the one on the left in oil that you see this scratching on. But he moved to New York in 1964, and a couple things happened in New York. One of them was his work changed dramatically, and he started making these kind of coil, intestine, noodle-like drawings. But one question that he had always asked himself was, where is the Filipino? He himself thought his own identity as a Filipino American was so critical and he didn't exactly know how to present it. And of course, this was an important time, the mid-1960s, because so many things were going on. In 1965, there was a Filipino-led farm workers strike in Delano that was later joined by Cesar Chavez. In Oakland, there was the founding of the Black Panther Party. 1968 was the Third World Liberation Front at Bay Area colleges. 1969, the Indians of all tribes took over Alcatraz Island, so he decided to return to San Francisco, but at the same time in Newark, the museum was presenting an exhibition of ethnographic objects from Oceania, including objects that Trisha will be talking about upstairs in the Asian gallery that is an important part of Villa's inspiration. Next slide. And what Villa said at that time, he was reading a book by Claude Lévi-Strauss, which was a sort of poetic ethnographic study. And you see the book in the center, Triste Tropique, and then some illustrations at the top that are actually in that book. What were the Bontoc body tattoos? So he searched them out and then started drawing. And as he, in his own words, he said, I took an eye-tech print of a photograph of myself, and I drew patterns on it long before I was aware of words and theories like recuperative strategy or reinvention. I was in the process of becoming. Before that, I was told who I was. From then until now, through the process of art, I became who I am. Next slide. And so, yes, he was looking at things like, you see the shoes and the case. He was looking at Magritte. You see the cape. Yes, he was looking at Matisse's famous things, but there are also ethnographic sources that are important to recognize that Trisha will point out. And of course, the front of this cape is painted with an airbrush that looks kind of like aerosol that was starting to happen, but let's look at the next slide. The back of the cape is all these handprints that goes back. He's looking at global and ancient art to reinvent art history, and that's where the title of the exhibition comes from, Worlds in Collision. At a certain point, though, he was working with feathers, and he developed a feather allergy. So he turned instead to using his own face and body to make body prints and casts of his own body, and also performance art, which you see in the bottom right. And I do want to point out, when you come into the museum, in the lobby, there are two of these large-scale body print pictures. The one on the left, I think you can see his body prints pretty clear. They look like abstract paintings, but then there's these impressions of footprints and hands. But the one on the right, it's a little bit hard to see, but I encourage everyone to look carefully, because those orange impressions are also body prints of the artists. He started to think that he needed to make more specific reference to his Filipino identity and the experience of his parents. The piece in the box on the right is called Immigration Policy, and it's a door that only opens a little bit, thinking about the experience of his parents. And the beautiful piece at the end of the long hallway here is entitled My Father Walking Up Kearny Street for the First Time. Again, thinking about his parents, the immigrants, walking into the Filipino ghetto of San Francisco, dwarfed by the high-rises, but telling that story with feathers. And then late in his career, he returned to a more minimalist way of working by scratching in abstract patterns into monochrome. It was actually a time a close member of his family was incarcerated. So these are apparently very minimal reductive objects, but they still have deep personal involvement for the artist. With that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Trisha Lagaso Goldberg, who will talk about Villa's work, but bring in the ethnographic sources.
Thanks so much, Mark. Hi, all. This is Trisha Lagaso Goldberg. I am co-curator of the Carlos Villa Worlds in Collision exhibition. I'm going to be talking about Worlds in Collision selections from the Asian Pacific collection and highlighting some incredible works from the Newark Museum's collection and talk about how they correspond to Carlos Villa's practice. I want to start by thanking the Newark Museum of Art, by thanking Linda Harrison, Catherine Evans, Sylvia Fantoni, Trisha Laughlin-Bloom, Elena Munoz, Imani Hector Lee, and other NMOA team members for the time, energy, and some support it took to really bring this exhibition to life. So thank you so much for that. Carlos Villa lived in New York from 1964 to 1969. During the latter part of his time on the East Coast, he made abstract sculptures and two-dimensional works, which was the contemporary visual language of the day. It was during this period that the artist began to seek out histories and objects from sources really outside of the dominant European and European American canons, including ethnographic work from Africa, from Aotearoa, from Australia, Brazil, Hawaii, Papua New Guinea, and the Philippines. He did this by visiting museums like the San Francisco De Young Museum and Newark Museum of Art, which housed vast collections of ethnographic work. Villa wasn't the only artist searching for roots and a breadcrumb trail leading to non-European based narratives and art histories. Betty Saar, the iconic Black American artist from Los Angeles, was also, whose work I want to mention, whose work is also included in the Newark Museum's collection, was also looking at ethnographic museum collections for inspiration around the same time. When Mark and I first started working with the Newark Museum of Art, we were excited at the prospect of including selections from the museum's collection to showcase in conjunction with the artist's retrospective, to illustrate the ties between these supercharged power objects from distant shores and Villa's artwork, especially the period from the 70s to 80s. It's in this vein that we present the Worlds in Collision selections from the Asian Pacific Collection exhibition currently on view in the Asian Pacific Gallery. In this first slide, features on the left a Hawaiian kapa or bark cloth capelet from the late 1800s, which is on the left, and Villa's painted cloak on the right. The capelet, according to Hawaiian culture specialist and kapa maker Kamalo Dupreez, is unique. While interviewing Kamalo, she mentioned that she's never seen another like this one, which may have been worn by a member of the royal class or other VIP. During the 1970s and 80s, Carlos made a number of incredible capes, cloaks, and coats painted canvas, essentially wearable paintings, detailed with feathers that he or others would wear during ceremonial-like performances. These garments would have a life of their own as standalone art objects and artifacts after a performance. We see what might be interpreted as the original source code for Villa's painted cloak in this Hawaiian capelet, both featuring graphic lines radiating out from a central point, similar in shape and uses, each an oblique reflection of the other. This slide features on the left daggers and kris swords from Indonesia and the Philippines, also from in the Newark Museum's collection, dating from the late 18th century into the 20th century. And on the right, we see Villa's force fields installation at Knowles College. The wavy blade at the center of the left-hand image is not unlike the type of sword that is rumored to have been used to kill Portuguese navigator Ferdinand Magellan by Filipino anti-colonial warriors on the shores of Cebu in the mid-1500s. In force fields, Villa's use of the kris symbolized power, ethnic pride, heritage, and nationalism among the Philippines and Southeast Asia, according to renowned scholar, curator, and cultural critic Margot Machida. So in this slide on the left, we have an image of an early 20th century tapa cloth from Samoa from the Newark Museum's collection, a fine example of a shaped piece of bark cloth painted with plant dyes, likely made for the non-Samoan tourist industry. On the right, we have one of Villa's iconic self-portraits, where he pictured himself at 35 years old, shirtless with a pair of jeans on, held up by a leather-studded belt, his skin inked in non-Western inspired tattoo designs, which Mark mentioned earlier, with knowing references to patterns found in books like Levi Strauss's Tris Tropique and museum collection ethnographic holdings such as the Samoan tapa cloth. So in this last slide, we see another fine example of the Newark Museum's collection, an early 20th century memorial board from Papua New Guinea on the left, and Villa's majestic work titled My Roots on the right. In 1967, the Newark Museum presented an exhibition titled Art of the South Sea Islands, which featured the striking ceremonial board, which measures approximately 7 feet high. Strong graphic lines that form undulating nested patterns seem reflected in Via's My Roots, which boasts a pattern of entrail-like coils that are accented by thick tufted sections of feathers. In closing, I'd like to share a short video produced by the Newark Museum of Art that features Dr. Ping Ann Ado, who serves as chair of the anthropology department at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and Hawaiian cultural resource specialist and kapa maker Kamalu Dupries from the Bernice Pauahi Bishop Museum, both speaking about the incredible kapa capelet from Hawaii in the Newark Museum's collection.
Feather capes that have been made for as long as we know in Hawaiian tradition were always reserved for very high-ranking people. This one, though, is made from tapa cloth or kapa, which is the word that in Hawaiian culture is used for bark cloth made from the paper mulberry tree.
The combination of red, yellow, and black colors, the overall design suggests whoever made or commissioned this piece must have been familiar with the use of the same elements found in traditional ahu'ula. This object may have evoked ahu'ula during a time when feather capes were not practical or possible in the late 1800s. On an adult body, the hem of this capelet probably wouldn't pass the shoulders when it was worn. So it's possible that the relative size of this capelet might have been made for a child. On the other hand, this could have been a scaled down model of a ahu'ula, for just purposes so people can understand what is an ahu'ula or what is a capelet, what is a piece of kapa. While there are some examples of ahu'ula that incorporate kapa on the underside as a lining, these are sort of post-collecting additions, perhaps by the collector. No more than a handful of objects like these are made from kapa. This capelet is just so unique just because it's made out of Hawaiian bark cloth.
Trisha, thank you so much for gathering those insights and also for working so closely with us to produce. There's 2 videos like this that people will be able to see in the installation. We've titled Worlds in Collision, Selections from the Asian Pacific Collection. So you'll want to see both when you come. And in the same way that this project has allowed us to connect with scholars in Hawaii and Boston, we wanted to highlight another aspect of the project, which is a collaboration with Rutgers University, the Clement Price Institute. We're building a Filipino-American oral history project. We're launching it in the exhibition with, you see here, the first 6 subjects that we've gathered stories from. They're live on the Rutgers website. And we're looking forward to bringing more stories into the oral history project and continuing this really important work of documenting the amazing everyday lives of people who have, at least in the New Jersey and New York area, have gone unreported for a long time.